Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting, City Council meeting, Law and Regulation Committee meeting of March 24th in session. Just want to read the ways in which the public can communicate. To help minimize the spread of COVID-19, members of the public may not attend in person but may view the meeting on Comcast Channel 14, Consolidated Communications Channel 73, AT&T UVerse. And the council meetings are also video streamed live and are available on the city's website and YouTube channel. Members of the public may offer public comment by phone by dialing 916-774-5353. If you need a disability-related modification or accommodation to participate in this meeting, please contact Voice at 916-774-5200. Can we call the roll? Silent roll call. We are in session. I'm going to ask our Public Information Officer, Rob Becerra, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Rob, and I think we all join our incredible, the large community in feeling the pain of the loss of the Boulder, Colorado police officers. So we know that each time one of our public safety folks, whether they're fire, police, even animal control, leaves their home, they leave the loved one behind who may be anxious, and especially in the last year, there's been increased anxiety. So we just wanted to recognize, as you do each day in your life, it's one large community of service before self, and exemplified by our own public safety officers. So thank you for that. We do not have any, well, I will open it up to public comment. If there's anyone who would like to make any public comments, they can do so by calling 916-774-5353. We'll wait a few minutes to see if anyone calls in and avails themselves of the public comment.
And this would be the time to speak to an item not on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that clarification. All right, hearing no callers, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which we don't have any. Do we have minutes of the previous meeting? We do not, do we? Okay. So this is my favorite part of the agenda, where I learn a lot after I've read a lot, and that's our reports from our electric department, our environmental utilities, and then the most important thing, priority legislation. We're going to start with Amber Blix providing us an update on priority legislation related to the our own electric utility, publicly owned, right?
Yes. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Hadashelt, Councilmember Mendonca, Amber Blix with Roseville Electric Utility. First, I wanted to just give kind of a update on the first slide of the key dates where we're at in the legislative process right now. Spring recess for the legislature will start the last week of March, and then some upcoming policy committee deadlines are late April, early May, depending on if it's a fiscal bill or not. But so those policy committee deadlines are coming up in the next month or so. And then the state legislation that I'm going to touch upon today has to do with the Wildfire Mitigation Financial Assistance Program, electrically conductive celebratory balloons, that's a fancy way of saying Mylar balloons, Department of Water Resources power procurement, transportation electrification, the 24/7 clean energy standard, and then utility poles and support structures, and that deals with the attachments. Next slide. So the first bill is AB 433 by Assemblymember Chen, California Wildfire Mitigation Financial Assistance Program, and it deals with voluntary contributions. We have a watch position on this for now. Really what this bill would require is for publicly owned utilities to include on their billing statement to its customers a line item that would allow a voluntary contribution to wildfire mitigation. It would establish the Financial Assistance Fund and the state Treasury as a repository for money and other donations collected, and then it would require us, the locally publicly owned utility, to remit those contributions on a monthly basis to the fund. The Energy Commission could have audit capability over our funds that we collect on a voluntary basis. And the one thing that's really that we're watching on this bill is it creates a lot of administration capabilities for the utility without any commensurate funding, and there's no requirement that any of the funds that would be voluntary collected would come back to our jurisdiction in any way. So we are continuing to work with our trade partners to find out more about this bill and also to discuss the administrative and financial burden that this could put on utilities, and in hopes of finding an alternate solution. And we're going to be participating in some of those meetings this Friday, so we'll be able to get more information and kind of bring this bill back to the committee after we have further discussions with the author's office. Next slide. AB 847, and this is the electrically conductive celebratory balloons. This is another bill that we'll be watching. This bill requires the Office of Energy Infrastructure and the Office of Emergency Services to adopt regulations governing the sale and manufacture of celebratory balloons that are constructed of electrically conductive material. And the regulations will require that these balloons pass a standard test without causing a fault at a high voltage electric distribution level, which has been known to cause outages or ignitions. And then after September 1st of 2023, a business shall not sell or offer for sale, and a manufacturer shall not manufacture for sale in California any balloons that don't meet these requirements. We're continuing to watch this bill right now. We think that there could be some positive that comes out of it because these kind of balloons do cause faults. But one thing we're watching right now is whether or not local ordinances will have the ability to kind of set their own standards. And so we're continuing to have discussions with our trade groups on this bill and following it as it kind of goes through the process. AB 1161 is the next bill on eligible renewable energy resources and zero carbon resources. And this bill we're planning to oppose through our trade associations at this current time. And really what it does is it calls for the Department of Water Resources to procure new eligible renewable energy and stored resources to satisfy 100% of the electricity procured to serve all state agencies by December 31st, 2030. The city is opposed to this bill because AB 1161 puts the Department of Water Resources in charge of contracting to serve the energy needs of state agencies that otherwise would be served by publicly owned utilities. And why this is important is because right now many utilities are going out to procure for the customers that they currently know that they're planning to serve, and it creates a lot of uncertainty in that regard once you start taking that customer base away. We think that this bill could be changed in a variety of different ways. We've heard a lot of different things so far this year, so we're going to continue to watch it to kind of see how it progresses, but we are opposing it through our trade associations at this time. SB 437 deals with integrated resource planning and transportation electrification, and it would include for our IRP integrated resource plan update that we would need to include details on rate design that supports transportation electrification. And the goal for the rate design is really to incentivize purchase of zero-emission vehicles. We'd also need to provide a cost calculator that would allow customers to predict the electricity cost of running these vehicles. And so far, we've been engaged in a lot of education and outreach, rebates and incentives for zero-emission vehicles. We're requesting more info on the rate design component of this bill, and we want to make sure that it's not overly restrictive for how we would kind of set up our programs and how we're looking at this going forward as part of the IRP process that we'll complete. SB 67, this bill is another one that we plan to oppose. This creates the 24/7 Clean Energy Standard Program. I brought this bill to the committee last month, and it was very it talked a lot about legislative intent in the last bill, and we were concerned that it might turn to this, what the bill is proposing now, and it has. And really what it speaks to is requiring 85% of retail sales annually and at least 60% of retail sales within certain sub-periods to be served by eligible clean energy resources by December 31st, 2030. And then similarly, 90% of retail sales annually and 75% of retail sales within certain subperiods by December 31st, 2035. And that sub-period that they're talking about is the net peak period. So you could think about the 5 to 8 p.m. hour where folks are going home, turning on a lot of lights, but meanwhile some of the other generation resources are coming offline. And so they really want that period to be served by renewable and storage resources. We are very concerned about this bill because it has the potential to increase costs significantly and could be very operationally difficult to implement. So this one is going to be one that we kind of go with our trade associations to oppose in the very near future. And then finally, SB 556 by Senator Dodd. This has to do with attachments to poles and support structures. And this bill really just revises the definition of a utility pole to include our transmission towers. It really expands where communication companies can use utility infrastructure for their communication attachments. And we are opposed to this. We've had a lot of residents express concerns about these attachments already throughout the city of Roseville, and this would create another avenue for those attachments that we think has already been kind of adequately addressed. So we're continuing to look at this bill and we'll oppose this going forward. So that is my report on the state legislative issues, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right, Councilman Mendoza?
I'm good. Thank you for your presentation.
So I was trying to remember, and for the, I was searching, at our last meeting, Councilman Mendoza, you asked a question. I thought it was related to utility billing, and I was trying to find it. I don't remember whether it was related to the delay in payment. I know we got an answer, and maybe Mark, you have a steel trap mind. Maybe you remember. I think the answer came from you to Councilman Mendoza. So before we end the meeting, one of us will find it. Because it was a great question about, the delay of payment and people's ability to, recapture their funding. So we'll find that. One of us will remember exactly what the answer was, but I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Mendoza asked a really good question last time, and you followed up with it. I have a general question, and maybe this is both start with Mark, but you have these watch. Then you have support, then you have oppose unless amended, and then you have outright opposed. Did I miss any category in there?
Support if amended as well.
Supported, there you go.
If amended.
If amended. So on 433, what's our criteria, for, on 433, I guess I was thinking that you made a strong case for just an opposed.
Yeah, and I can just give you a little bit of my line of thinking on that. I think traditionally, I think a lot of the politics of whether or not a bill will move will come into play regarding what position we take on it. And so it's very early in the legislative process right now. And so I think some of these we can have conversations, and they could be very productive conversations that where we're really heard and our concerns are heard, and then maybe the bill changes it or morphs into something different. And so I think that's more of where I'm thinking of kind of the watch position, whereas some of the other bills, they're just a hard no, and then that's where we're going to come straight opposed after, doing the appropriate steps, meeting with the author and things like that.
That's a great answer. Having spent a short year down there under the dome, I understand it is a long process, and you don't want to start off with a no. You want to try to get to yes, right?
Right, and the great thing is sometimes when you do have a watch or a bill that you're concerned of, it actually really creates a great opportunity for you to create a great relationship going forward and inform folks about what your position is and why you feel that way. And so I think that's another reason why we take a watch on a lot of these.
Mr. Walensky, anything to add to that?
No, great explanation. Just to add a little bit, it would furthermore, there's a greater approach to the strategy. And so sometimes not only having the conversations with the author, but having conversations with our lobbyist, with having conversations with other utility groups or with other organizations to find out where they are. Because sometimes we as a city don't want to be in a lead position. And so we're looking to see what other groups may be participating, or what advocacy positions that they might be taking that would have an impact on the position that we're going to take as well.
Great, thank you for that additional explanation. I think this is the point in which we seek if there's any public comment on the report. And if you'd like to comment, you can do so by dialing 916-774-5353. We'll wait a few moments to see if anybody wants to comment on the celebratory, that's a hard word to say, balloon ordinance.
Celebratory, yeah.
Right, the Mylar balloon ordinance. All right, thank you. Hearing none. Councilman Mendoza, there was the question. I knew you had a salient question. So do you want to ask that now, or?
Oh, actually, yeah, this was utility, and then also same question on the rental deferral.
Yeah, you want to ask that?
So the follow-up question was, does the deferring of the utility payments result in the bad credit reporting? So by putting that off, I think you probably remember where we were going with that. And you did respond to me with your answer on that, but I know the original one I did was pertaining to housing. And so this would the same apply to utility billing as well? Or I'm sorry, it was rental assistance. I'm sorry, not housing.
Correct. And based on the information that I pulled from the bill, it relates to rental units, but not to the credit reporting of someone with a mortgage.
And I would think that would be the case because, correct me if I'm wrong, but because we own our own utility, do we report to creditors late pays?
I'd have to get more information about that.
I've never been in that position, so I don't know. But I mean, I would think landlords and obviously mortgage companies and things would, but I would think it would depend on if we report or not, right? Whether or not that would affect them.
Yeah, I'm not certain. We can definitely get that information for you. But again, there is that clear distinction on the emergency rental assistance that's happening for the utilities. It is specific to rental, to renters, and not to owners of homes. So there's a distinction there with how that framework for the funding out of the emergency rental assistance funding is categorized and how it's being applied.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Everybody? All right, well, no public comment on that. Our next up is our environmental utilities priority legislation. Marisa Tricas will give us an update.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Haudeshelt and Councilmember Mendoza. So on behalf of Environmental Utilities, Government Relations Team, I'll provide an update on the wastewater and recycled water program. And then in the next slide, you'll see that my counterpart, Noel Maddock, will provide updates on the water and waste services priority legislation. We will pause in between each presentation for questions, and then she will turn it over to Mark. So on the next slide, I think this first federal legislation will get to Councilmember Mendoza's question. That is H.R. 1319, and that's the American Rescue Plan. And this is the second wave of the federal COVID stimulus. And a new component within this second wave, Councilmember Mendoza, is a $9.96 billion homeowner assistance fund. So that's going to prevent defaults and foreclosures, and then also funds can be used to reduce mortgage principal, assist homeowners with insurance, taxes, and then also utilities payments. So that's also, I think they figured out the kinks in that first wave, and then this second wave will likely address your question. So for the update on this bill as well, it was signed into law. In addition to the $9.96 billion for the homeowner assistance fund I just discussed, there will also be a $21.55 billion addition to the rental assistance payments which also can be used for utility payments. So utility payments are kind of encompassed in all of the federal funding. And then it also will be, the legislation also adds an additional $500 million to that existing $638 million we'd covered last presentation. And that's for the grant states and tribes to assist the low-income households for owners or operators of public water and wastewater systems. So that's just an update on that. We are, EU's working with Mark to make sure that we're covering this as far as EU goes, and then also coordinating with the other relevant EU departments. The next bill, which will also help address Vice Mayor Halderschildt's question on the oppose unless amended. This bill, as a reminder to the committee, I would provide periodic updates on AB 377 that was introduced by Rivas. And since the staff report last month, this bill is being heard in the Environmental Safety and Toxics Materials Committee on April 7th. And then additionally, that's the one that impaired waters and limits on the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So the process right now, as far as that oppose unless amended version goes, is that we are working with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. They formed a small subcommittee where I was asked to and invited to participate in a technical assistance capacity. So that will help develop comments. I think Vice Mayor Halderschildt had concerns as well on that, and we are working with them to submit our comments. So that's that oppose unless amended aspect of it. We will provide these comments, and then hopefully the bill author will incorporate them, and we can get a new bill out there. Mark, does that encompass kind of the oppose unless amended? Great. So just as an update on this bill, the proposed changes that would be costly to the wastewater division I wanted to update you all on were the proposed changes to the existing anti-degradation analysis process. Additionally, there's proposed changes to existing waiver violations related to compounds that exceed permit limits. And another comment that we provided were in regards to proposed changes to existing physical construction costs to meet these new State Water Resources Control Board mandates. So I did want to give you all that update on that bill. For the next bill, AB 802, that's what's called a spot bill, and a spot bill or intent bill, as a point of reference for the committee here, is one that's not fully developed when it's introduced, and something our government relations team does watch closely, but there are elements within the current text that are important to us for certain reasons. So that also addresses how Amber was describing giving a watch position first can help us to understand the bills that may be introduced a little bit more last minute than others. But this bill is an important issue to the wastewater division. There are implications to our pre-treatment program as far as microfiber pollution goes. The state board for this bill is essentially requiring, will be identifying the latest and greatest technology as far as regulating these microfiber pollutants goes. These can be upwards or, as small as 75 microns, which is about the width of somebody's hair. So that is how small we are dealing with these microfiber pollutants. So this bill is also going to be heard in the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee on April 7th, so I'll be sure to provide an update as well on that. But we are watching. The next bill is on the AB 818, the Bloom by Bloom, or our pre-moistened non-woven disposable wipes. So from last month, we decided to support this bill after doing an analysis. And just as a reminder, this bill prohibits the sale or advertisement of any disposable wipe materials labeled as flushable or sewer or septic system safe. Flushable wipes are made of materials that do not break apart, causing blockages to our wastewater treatment systems. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we saw a drastic increase in the use of these non-flushable wipes or, other wipes that folks were using to disinfect. And this is very costly to the wastewater division with our 700 miles of collection system pipes running through and around the city. But also, this bill will be heard on April 7th by the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee. The next bill is AB 273, and that's on waste discharge requirements. The bill would authorize a municipal wastewater agency to partner with entities responsible for stormwater management. So this will give a little more allowable engagement for the wastewater utility and stormwater utilities to collaborate and work on projects together relating to management of our stormwater runoff, and then, of course, our dry weather runoff. So wastewater division staff is working with the city attorney's office who manages the stormwater compliance program. So we're identifying what, if any, impacts this bill may have. But right now, we are in support of this, fostering this partnership amongst our utilities. The last update is on the implementation of that 1383, the State Water Resources Control Board, the short-lived climate pollutant regulation. And, again, this is another critical priority regulation to EU. It isn't the end of the legislative period when these regulations are implemented. We have to track and constantly provide oversight on what these regulations are actually doing. But this one was signed into law by Governor Brown, and it establishes a methane emission reduction targets in the statewide effort to reduce emissions. But this affects our biosolids program. As the current, the current regulation doesn't allow for us to work appropriately within that world. So we have met with the State Water Resources Control Board with their new biosolids coordinator, just to get a little bit more of a sense on what this regulation is going to do. We're still in very preliminary discussions, but they were interested in hearing more about our biosolids programs and the impacts that this bill could provide on that. So more to come on that, but it was good to, sit down with the virtual interactions with the board and, meet them face to face. And then as far as the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, we will be bringing that to council on April 21st, so please be on the lookout for that approval process. And then, of course, I'm developing that one-pager, which our EU director will be sending to the council, and it's essentially a FAQ on what is going to be happening on WIFIA, and just provide kind of a 101 background for you all to reference. So with that, any questions before I turn it over?
Thank you.
Thanks for saving the ratepayers by being vigilant on the legislation. With that, can you bring some rain, Noelle? Can you bring some rain to the podium, please?
Thank you.
I wish I could make it rain. Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Hadushelt and Councilmember Mondanza. Of course, it gets stuck in the earring. The joy of masks. Today, I will be covering several pieces of state legislation and a federal bill that has impacts, including potential funding for all three divisions within EU, and provide an update on the newly proposed Advanced Clean Fleet regulation. The first measure that I'm going to be talking about is it's first important to understand why cities like Roseville charge connection fees and sewer capacity charges. We do so to recover the direct costs of providing service to a new development. In addition, these fees can also be used to help build infrastructure and expand our water supply portfolio to meet the needs of new development rather than placing those impacts on current customers. AB 59 proposes to make several changes that pose a threat to the reliability of these funding sources for us. There are a couple of aspects of the bill that affect our ability to actually offset the impacts of new development and adequately plan for future water supply needs and invest in our infrastructure. AB 59 would repeal the current 120-day statute of limitations for legal challenges to new or increased connection fees or capacity charges. And instead, the statute of limitations would not begin to run until the agency actually charges a fee to the applicant. This means the city could be sued years after adopting our rates. It would also place new limitations on the data that Roseville could use or rely on in defense of a protest or lawsuit. We would be limited to using only information made available to the public, such as information on our website that could be used in defense of our rates. This measure actually has citywide impacts, so we are coordinating closely with our response and efforts with the city manager's office and Mark. The next measure is SB 323. As seen with the introduction of AB 59, the fees and charges collected for water and sewer have been increasingly under attack over the last few years. It's important for utilities to have fiscal stability and certainty so we can provide our essential services and plan to meet the needs of our residents not only today, but in the future. SB 323 would extend to water and sewer agencies the ability to validate our charges in a superior court to determine their validity. This would stave off lawsuits and challenges after their adoption. This ability is already enjoyed by some other utilities, like the electric utilities. This measure does not require us to validate our fees and charges, but would rather provide Roseville the ability to do so. We think that flexibility is very important, especially when Roseville is embarking on large infrastructure projects, especially like in the water division, where we're working on the aquifer storage and recovery program, and we're acquiring debt through the WIFIA loan. This is why we are supporting SB 323, which is actually being sponsored by the Association of California Water Agencies. The next measure is SB 427, which is being sponsored by the Oak Grove Water District, which is one of our partners in the Regional Water Authority. SB 427 would actually increase the penalties for water theft. Current law sets the fine penalty for water theft at $100 for the first violation, $200 for the second violation of the same ordinance in a 12-month period, and then at $500 for each additional violation. This measure would increase those fines to $1,000, $2,000, and then $5,000 respectively. The current fine amounts just simply aren't enough to deter people from illegally connecting to a water system. As well, agencies like Roseville not only lose revenue, but we also face regulatory fines for not meeting our conservation goals. As well, illegally connecting to the water system has the potential to introduce contaminants into our water system, which is why we are supporting this measure. The next measure is the Climate Leadership and Environmental Action for Our Nation's Future Act. It's a mouthful. Shorten that to Clean Future Act. In early March, the House Democrats on the Committee on Energy and Commerce reintroduced this legislation. And it is actually a compilation of various clean energy and climate proposals from the past year and includes new environmental justice provisions and would also establish ambitious climate goals, such as achieving a net zero greenhouse gas emissions limit no later than 2050 and an interim goal of reducing emissions by 50% from 2005 levels by 2030. The bill also provides $565 billion in both sector-specific and economy-wide solutions to help reduce the nation's greenhouse gas emissions and increase the use of renewable energy. It's important to note here, we have not taken a formal position on this measure at this time as we monitor all the funding and economic stimulus bills that are introduced to determine what is in the best interest of Roseville. Next, we'll move to the Waste Services Division. Thank you. I spoke to you last month about AB 96. I'm bringing this bill back now because we had a change in position. We were supporting the measure before. We've moved to a watch. The reason we were supporting this measure was because of the change in definition of near zero and zero emission engines, which would have benefited our solid waste fleet. That definition has been removed from the bill. So we are backing off the support and we are at a watch. The sponsors of the measure say that they would like to get that definition back in. Personally, I think it's highly unlikely, but we're going to do whatever we can to help the sponsors to see if we can get it back in, because it would be a huge benefit to our fleet as well as the entire fleet for Roseville. The next measure is AB 318. This measure would exempt green waste from classification as a hazardous waste, so long as it has not been contaminated by a chemical that the Department of Toxic Substances Control determines to be hazardous or toxic. We are reviewing this bill as green waste is defined as grass clippings, weeds, leaves, plant trimmings, in addition to agricultural plant waste. So this includes much of the common green waste from our residences. Being that this measure creates a new state-mandated program, it also creates a new crime for improper disposal of green waste. We are working to determine the impact, if any, of these new requirements and to determine if there are any barriers to the implementation. We are working with the California Product Stewardship Council as well as the Solid Waste Industry Group to determine if any amendments are needed. The next measure is AB 1086, which is dealing with organic waste. California has actually adopted many goals when it comes to organic waste, but does not have a detailed plan or implementation strategy that identifies specific measures needed to achieve those goals. This measure would require the Natural Resources Agency to prepare and submit to the legislature by January 1 of 2023, a report that provides a coordinated implementation strategy to achieve the state's organic waste and related climate change, air quality, mandates, goals, and targets. My initial reaction to this legislation is supportive. Currently, there are numerous state departments and boards and commissions all working to address greenhouse gases, methane, short-lived climate pollutants, but there is no coordinated approach in achieving the state's goals. If this report can help to coordinate the state's efforts, we think that would be very helpful. Additionally, with the report going back to the legislature, we would have the opportunity to work with them on issues we've already identified where various regulations that are being adopted are in conflict of each other. The next measure is SB 289. This measure is adding nickel metal hydride and lithium-ion batteries to the definition of household batteries for the purpose of allowing the Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery to conduct a study on the disposal and recyclability of household batteries. This measure is sponsored by the California Product Stewardship Council and is a positive step forward in determining how best to handle the disposal and recycling of the newer technology batteries. Finally, I have Advanced Clean Truck Rule up there. We talked about that last month. The State Air Resources Board just held a workshop on their proposed clean fleets. I'm going to focus my comments and share what they presented as the proposed regulation for public fleets. Beginning in 2023, which is just 2 years from now, 50% of our replacement vehicles would have to be zero-emission vehicles. And in 2026, 100% of our replacements would have to be zero-emission vehicles. They do have a A kind of an out, if you have plug-in hybrids, those will count as zero-emission vehicles until 2035. There are extensive new annual reporting requirements, as well as every time you add a new vehicle to your fleet or replace a vehicle, you're going to have to report that to the State Air Resources Board within 30 days. They do provide some exemptions, but they are solely at the discretion of the State Air Resources Board. One is if they determine a vehicle is not available to meet your needs. Two, if the manufacturer has delays and can't meet the production date. Or if the chassis or complete vehicle is not available by more than one manufacturer, or the chassis is not able to be upfitted for the needs of our fleet. But again, that will be at their determination, not at ours. We have many concerns and are working with the city's fleet manager and our advocates to seek changes to this proposed regulation. If you have any questions, I am happy to try and answer.
Member Mendoza?
I had one question. Going back to the Senate bill slide you had, SB 427.
Yes, the water theft.
Yeah, on water theft.
Yes.
Is in Roseville, I mean, I'm not saying water theft doesn't happen. I'm sure it does, or wouldn't be bringing it up. But is this more of a business water theft that we see on a large scale, or residential, or I'm just trying to get a scope of water theft here in Roseville and what that looks like.
I can get you more specific information, but the information that's been provided to me is been a lot of times it's been probably some developers who have tapped in, or there's been some other water agencies that have tapped in. So it varies, but I'm absolutely happy to bring back additional information to you.
Okay. I was just curious, excuse me, because I was trying to figure out how that would work in some of our, higher density, close 5-foot lot lines in our homes. Who wouldn't notice, an increased water bill?
Yeah, it's not necessarily somebody tapping into somebody else's. Like on the residential, it's more on.
Big, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in agriculture, we have illegal diversions that happen, out of canals and things like that. And I imagine, and again, this is legislation that encompasses the entire state. But I imagine there's places in which, someone takes, is in a construction zone and connects with a fire hydrant or something like that, right? So,
Yes.
Wow, you really piqued my interest in a couple of things. AB 59.
Yes.
Does that impact the commercial and retail builders? You referenced the housing industry being behind that, but are the commercial and retail builders also behind that?
I would have to get back to you on the specific builders.
Yeah, not a problem. And then have we talked with our local home building industry association about our position?
I have not spoken to the Northern California BIA.
Yeah. Okay. And then this clean truck, well, can we go back to 318?
Clean fleets?
Yeah, I want to go back to 318 for some reason.
Oh, 318?
I wrote that down. Why did I write that down?
The green waste?
Yeah, thank you. So did I hear you? Is it possible that if I fertilize my lawn and I put it in the bin, that the Department of Toxic Substance would deem that a hazardous waste and couldn't be sent to the landfill? Is that a theoretically possible outcome?
That is the theoretical outcome,
Right.
which is why we're very concerned and trying to see, because we wouldn't know.
Right.
When you fertilized, when anybody had applied any type of chemicals to any of their trees, grass, anything. And so we do believe there are some barriers for that implementation. And so we're working internally as well as with our association to determine how best to address that.
Right, I think that's important because we think of hazardous waste in a, you know, a brownfield situation or a nuclear reactor meltdown or something like that. But at the implementation, the regulation level, it gets really, really, it's a broad, the definition of hazardous has wide-ranging implications. So I just want to
Yes.
make sure. And then with the clean truck rule, 2023, 50%?
Yes, and that was my mistake. I did reference clean truck rule. It is clean fleets. So the clean truck rule is where we have to do reporting on our fleets, and that's where there's the sales mandate. This is now the clean fleets regulation is proposing an actual purchasing. So this is that next step where they're proposing to impose mandates on when we start purchasing.
And 50% by 2023 and 100% by 2026?
Yes. Seems very excessively fast.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking of the, I think of the financial implication and not having seen the particulars of the bill, right? I mean, in a larger metropolitan jurisdiction, probably, that ends up in the cost, the rates and everything else like that.
It
small
absolutely
jurisdictions like Woodland or Williams, if they have a fleet, their ability to absorb costs, much like their ability to replace aging infrastructure, has a significant impact on their ratepayers. So, okay.
And I will say that there are several counties that are more rural that are receiving an exception because they are smaller and they're more they're
Sure.
diverse, spread out versus the more urban areas. I didn't include that because Placer County is not one of those counties, so it would not apply to us.
I think we all, want to have the cleanest air we can have and, certainly reduce pollutants, but, we need to do that in a sustainable and a reasonable manner.
Yeah. And it's not just the vehicles, it's all the infrastructure that needs to be built and created to help do that charging.
Okay. All righty. Well, we'll open this portion of the environmental utilities up to anyone who has any public comment by dialing 916-774-5353. We'll wait a few minutes. All right. Unless not hearing the phone ring, we'll move on to our priority legislation. Mr. Walensky.
Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Hodeschelt and Councilmember Mendoza. Once again, I'm Mark Walensky, the Government Relations Administrator, and I'm joined this afternoon for this presentation by Rob Becerra, the Police Department's Public Information Officer. Our presentation is an overview of the city's priority list of legislation and other areas of concern or interest. By way of background, the legislature continues to focus on addressing state homeless crisis by building on the efforts that have been undertaken by the state over the past 2 years. Clearly, homelessness is not just an issue for large cities, rather it is an issue that impacts communities of all sizes throughout the state. With more than 100,000 people living on the streets, the legislature recognizes this is a serious problem that remains at the forefront of issues the state must continue to address. Subsequently, our report this afternoon will focus on public safety and homelessness. And so with that, I'd like to transition to the legislation that has been introduced this year with respect to public safety and turn the presentation over to Rob.
And Mr. Becerra, before you start, I want to recognize Councilman Mendoza, who spent a decade in the service of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and certainly a key partner with our local jurisdictions. So, thank you for your service in protecting the public.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Mark. And I have 3 pieces of legislation that I'm going to talk with you really quickly about. I will say at this point, the government relations team has identified at least 183 pieces of legislation this cycle that could potentially have some impact on the operations of public safety. It runs the gamut from everything regarding decertification of police officers, civil rights issues, elimination of qualified immunity for police officers, records releases, use of force, kinetic energy, and I'll circle back to LPR technology at the end of my comments. The three pieces that I'm going to talk about today are AB 89, Peace Officers Minimum Qualification. This is a big shift to move the age of an officer, which currently sits at 18 to qualify to be a law enforcement officer, and moving that to 24 years of age, or to hold an advanced degree. So to be 24 or hold an advanced degree to be able to apply for and qualify as a peace officer in the state. We are taking a watch position on this currently because recruitment of law enforcement officers it's a very dynamic charge, and we do an exceptional job at it, but this would certainly limit the pool of available individuals who may seek a career in law enforcement. So again, we are currently watching AB 89. SB 98 is near and dear to my heart as a public information officer. This limits the police department's ability to limit access for media, specifically regarding command posts. So during an emergency or an incident, law enforcement officers would set up a command post around a crime scene or an active incident. Currently, we are able to set up media staging areas, and this law would actually allow the media to be able to enter into a command post, enter into an operational area, and it would create some significant challenges. We are watching this just to see how the language unfolds and see what the ultimate impacts are going to be. But right now, SB 98 is a watch. SB 387 is something that we've taken a support position on, and we are in alignment with our partners in the California Police Officers Association and the California Police Chiefs Association, are all supporting SB 387, which really does a great job to enhance the training, education, experience, and prerequisites for police officers. And this was a bill that was championed and rallied by our partners in CPOA and Cal Chiefs to kind of amplify that profession of law enforcement, but act really as a counter to AB 89 that seeks to increase the minimum qualifications. And the last point I'll make is last meeting, Councilmember Mendonça, you asked about the LPR technology and the justification behind this bill coming forward. And when you dig deeper into the bill, it actually appears that it really is surrounding federal immigration enforcement. And that is something that the author notes in the bill is that there's a belief by the author that ALPR technology is being used repeatedly for immigration enforcement instead of immediate comparisons of crime. Now, that's straight from the bill text and the language to answer your question you had last time. With that, any questions?
Councilmember Mendonça?
Rob, thank you for following up on that question from the last meeting. On AB 89, if we are increasing the minimum age on the front end, are we also increasing the maximum age on the back end?
That is not associated with AB 89. However, I will say changes to PERS and have actually adjusted police officer retirement age to, I believe it to be now 57.
Really?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. And then on SB 98, I know we're only taking a watch position, but I would encourage the city to, really keep an eye on this. I'm not a big fan of the media in our staged areas. I believe sometimes they're well intended, but there's always those media people that are trying to make a name for themselves and get a little too cowboyish or cowgirlish to be properly PC. And I think sometimes they can do more harm to our officers in the operation, whether or not their intentions are to do so. So that one really concerns me. But it is eye-opening to about the 18 to 24, though. That's I think there's a lot of people who may have family members who have been in law enforcement or in the military, or families that have made careers of this over generations, and some people just aren't college people. I mean, that's just the fact of life, and that's why trade schools do so well and other forms of non-traditional education. And people are out of high school who might get that calling. The other question I had too is some of the participants, like through our RPAL, and things like that. So when they turn 18, we're going to ask them now to wait an extended period of time before they can even join our police organization?
We have some great recruitment programs. We have an Explorer program that really transitions someone in to being a high school Explorer to bringing them in as a community service officer and then moving them right into a police trainee position. It's a great progression. We've had several officers follow that path. It certainly would increase a gap where they wouldn't be able to naturally progress. There would be a significant number of years, 4 to 6 years, before they would actually be able to apply to be a police trainee. So, a long-term recruitment, definitely some challenges there.
I would think with retirements and things being what they are, just that gap in recruitment could cause some long-term challenges for us as we grow as a city, and also as we try to attract the best that we can for our police department. So thank you, Rob, for your update.
And I will give you one comment on SB 98, and I will say the Roseville Police Department, and I know the city of Roseville, we actually have a really incredible working relationship with the media, and I think it's one of the reasons why, at least for Roseville's standpoint, we are taking a watch position, but I could see other areas of the state where maybe that relationship does not exist. So, I will say we do consider the media in many ways our partners, and they certainly help with messaging when we need it too. So,
well noted. Thank you.
Well, I'll start with where you ended on SB 98. The integrity of the investigation scene is critically important, right? If a process isn't followed, then it creates vulnerability in the prosecution of whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be, a capital offense or anything like that. So I was a little, I understand why local with your local perspective, but sure seems like that this might be a higher priority, so opposed unless amended or something like that. So I share Councilman Mendonza's concern about the integrity of the crime scene, and then the ultimate, execution of the case. And following along with the comments on AB 89, I'm glad you mentioned Explorers. So my question will be very precise. Does the definition of peace officer only include sworn, or does it include with a CSO or an animal control? Well, animal control officer is sworn, aren't they? They are, but they do not have arrest powers. They do not have peace officer powers, at least in our jurisdiction. And specifically, this would apply to public safety officers who have powers of arrest. So police officers in the city of Roseville. Other jurisdictions, there might be other definitions, but just police officers. Well, I think, and this is outside of our jurisdiction, but I believe fish and wildlife officers have the ability power to arrest because they carry, okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your report, and thanks for all your activity with respect to the unsheltered, the unhoused, the homeless, and others. So this is an important issue and probably going to be a growing issue in the years to come, so. We'll work on a solution. Do you want me to open for public comment, or do you want to go into your priority legislation right now?
Why don't we go ahead and we'll go through the presentation, and then you can open it up for public comment. And then Rob
thank you
will be
very much.
available.
All right.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, so we'll move on to homelessness, and great segue. This year, more than 50 bills were introduced that relate to homelessness. I'll focus on 3 that are currently on our track list, our priority list of legislation. Assembly Bill 411, This bill would enact the Veterans Housing and Homeless Prevention Bond Act of 2022 to authorize the issuance of bonds to provide additional funding for veterans housing and homelessness. The city has taken a watch position on the bill to understand the full outcomes if the bond was passed and the types of resources, funding, and programs it would provide to local governments and homeless service providers in our region. Assembly Bill 816. This bill would require the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council to conduct a statewide needs and gap analysis to identify state programs to provide housing or services to persons experiencing homelessness and create a financial model that will assess certain investment needs for the purposes of moving persons experiencing homelessness into permanent housing. Similarly, the city has taken a watch position on this bill to understand what the state will do with this information, what new requirements the city might need to fulfill, and what implications this might have on the city's efforts to address homelessness. And then Senate Bill 678, the Unaccompanied Women Experiencing Homelessness Act. This bill would require the Homeless Coordinating and Finance Council, once again, to assume additional responsibilities, including setting specific measurable goals aimed at preventing and ending homelessness among unaccompanied women in the state, and defining outcome measures and gathering data related to these goals. The city is similarly taking a watch position on this bill to understand what programs and resources might become available to help women experiencing homelessness and how the city and its partners could access these new resources if this bill were to be signed into law. With respect to other areas of interest, Assembly Bill 339, this bill would require all meetings of the legislature and local governments to include an opportunity for all persons to attend via a call-in option or an internet-based service option that provides closed captioning services and requires translation services to be provided. The city has taken an opposed position on this bill as it would be very costly to implement the new requirements for all city council, board, and commission meetings and public workshops, and limit options for where meetings could be held in the event technology-intensive sites were unavailable if the bill was signed into law. This bill also creates other issues regarding translators and translation services during in-person and/or virtual meetings. Senate Bill 278, the California Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013, or PEPRA, generally requires a public retirement system to modify its plan or plans to comply with the act. This bill would establish new procedures under the cases in which the California Public Employee Retirement System, or CalPERS, determines that the benefits of a member or an annuitant are or would be based on disallowed compensation that conflicts with PEPRA and other specified laws, and thus is not allowed. The city has taken an opposed position on this bill as it would require public agencies to directly pay retirees and/or their beneficiaries disallowed retirement benefits using general fund dollars. The change would eliminate any incentive CalPERS has to properly calculate benefit payments and would place 100% of the total liability for disallowed retirement benefits on public agencies, abdicating all responsibility previously held by CalPERS. This is a reintroduction of a bill that was introduced last year and failed to move forward. The city took a similar position on the bill last year as well. And then with respect to SB 341, this bill would require each provider of telecommunication services to maintain on its internet website a public outage map showing the provider's outages, and would require the office, in consultation with the Public Utilities Commission, to adopt by regulation requirements for those maps. The city is supporting this bill as it would require telecommunication providers to maintain these maps on their website, which would increase transparency around the frequency of outages and where they are occurring. With respect to COVID-19 recovery, the coronavirus relief bill, the American Rescue Plan. As you know, earlier this month, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan into law. The measure includes about $360 billion to help state, local, tribe, and territorial governments mitigate the fiscal impacts of the COVID-19 emergency. The measure sets a 60-day timeline to distribute most funds to state and local recipients, and a second distribution would be to localities would happen 12 months after the initial allocation. State and local recipients could use the funds to cover costs for items such as responding to the COVID-19 emergency and address its negative economic impacts, including providing aid to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and industries such as tourism and hospitality, and providing government services and addressing government services affected by revenue reduction during the pandemic. Also included is funding for capital project. It includes about $10 billion for the Treasury Department to make separate payments to state, territories, and tribal governments to fund capital projects to support work, education, and health monitoring in response to the pandemic. There are other programs in the relief bill that will provide additional help to state and local governments, residents, and businesses in our community and throughout the region as well. And finally, with respect to infrastructure, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, Congress is now working on the possibility of passing a massive infrastructure package being called the Build Back Better Plan. There is widespread agreement that funding for infrastructure projects is a critical need throughout the nation. The comprehensive plan is already taking shape in public committee hearings and conversations with members of Congress. Along with the infrastructure investment, the package could be much more expansive to include items such as water issues, to broadband, to energy grid, and more. At this time, it's not clear how those ideas might be brought together in a final bill, but staff will closely monitor the progress of the infrastructure discussions to understand the funding opportunities that would exist for Roseville if a bill is ultimately signed into law. And in conclusion, we'll continue to work with our city departments to develop advocacy strategies and to communicate those strategies to our elected officials as well as to our lobbyists. In addition, staff will continue to bring the updated list back to the L&R committee for their input and comments on any of the bills. And I'd like to add one final item, and that's going back to your question, Vice Mayor Hodescheld, with respect to advocacy positions. You know, one of the most time-intensive and activities that the government relations team undertakes once the bills have been introduced is that continual ongoing review of bills, looking for amendments, looking for changes to language, and to understand where our partners are on various bills. And so we're continually developing or refining those advocacy strategies based on that continual onslaught of information. And so with that, this concludes our presentation, and we're prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Councilman Mendoza.
Mark, thank you as always. Great presentation. I always learn so much. I just wanted to note that I agree on the SB 341, the outages maps by providers. By day, I work for a telecommunications company that's regulated by the FCC, and we have to provide these outage maps and updates on our website when they occur, and as do the other providers in our space. And I do agree that it's a great benefit and provides great transparency and can be certainly helpful for a city like ours to know when those outages occur. So that's I'm glad that bill is coming forward, and I'm glad that we're supporting it. But other than that, thank you again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mark. On your priority list is AB 1322, Land Use Charter Cities Single Family Homes. If we haven't had an update on that, can you make sure at a future meeting when it's appropriate, maybe the bill doesn't go anywhere? You have, I don't know how many pages, you have 82 pages of priority legislation, I think, here. Yeah, 82 pages. So there's a lot going on, and will be going on in the legislature this year. So thank you for your vigilance, because I know it does take a lot of time to interact and monitor and talk to our team and then talk with with others. I neglected to say, under the previous conversation about AB 377, it is rare when you get what I call the NASCAR letterhead, right, with all the organizations at the top, right, from agriculture and from urban water providers. One of my colleagues came into the office yesterday and said, "Have you seen this?" I said, "Yes, I have." So, that just is an indication that there's got to be a lot of work on that bill. Anyway, with that commentary, I'll open it up for public comment. Again, if you have a public comment on any of the legislation brought up under priority legislation, the telephone number is 916-774-5353. We'll wait a couple of moments. Okay. Is there anything else to come before us today? If not, we'll adjourn to the fourth Wednesday of April, which I have no idea. Helen probably knows what the date is, but we'll see you back here at 4 o'clock on the fourth Wednesday of April. And thank you all for all the work you're doing to keep us up to date on important policy and regulatory developments. Meeting adjourned.